Composing music with text poses some specific challenges above and beyond the usual musical ones. Sung text is very different from spoken text. All a good actor needs to be understood is clear articulation and the ability to project their voice. But singers project their voices on vowels since consonants aren't sustained. So the normal balance between vowels and consonants when speaking is very different from that when singing the same words. This is why it's not easy to follow a sung text without help. Pop music is almost always sung with a microphone, which solves the problem. But microphones are not normally used in live performances of classical music. Sometimes opera houses can have the words projected above or below, which helps enormously. This is much less common in lieder concerts. Basically, there are two kinds of music with text. Music where it's critical to understand the words, and music where all the listener needs to understand is the overall mood. In classical opera, this is the difference between recitative and aria. In the former, the accompaniment is minimal, and the words are sung directly with little distraction, so a listener can more easily comprehend what's happening in the story. In the latter, the words can be ornamented, repeated, and parts of the text may even come back later. But as long as you realize, say, that you're listening to a love song, the musical mood dominates, you don't need to understand every detail. Here's an example from Mozart's opera Così fan tutte. As we can see here, in the recitative, the vocal line has lots of short, repeated notes. The accompaniment is just plain block chords on the harpsichord. This makes the text relatively easy to understand with no distractions. Unfortunately, I could not find any audio for these examples that isn't under copyright for the USA. Now here's the beginning of the aria which follows the recitative. Notice how the vocal line here is much more mobile. It also has a much more elaborate accompaniment, pizzicato bass, sustained middle parts of the violas, and moving figuration of the violins. In the operas of Wagner and his followers, this distinction disappears. Of course, at least in opera, you have the action on the stage to help you understand the situation. But you also have a much bigger orchestra, which can sometimes drown out the singer completely. But in singing classical songs, all you have is the expression on the singer's face and body. And while the music should be convincing on its own, it's always more enjoyable if you know what's being said. If you want to set text to music well, you have to respect the words and make the text as understandable as possible. What does this mean? A text normally has a certain rhythm as well as a certain melodic contour. For example, if we take the phrase, "The leaves of summer are flying in the wind," which of these two melodies fits it better? I don't have a simulation that can include words, so try to say the words in the same rhythm as the music as you listen. This first example contradicts the natural contour and accents of the text. Here is the text with accents in bold. If we had to choose the most important word, it might be summer or perhaps flying, but in the above example, the important syllables all have shorter notes than the unimportant words around them, like the, of, in, and the again. So even if the listener can make out the words, they're almost comically wrongly accented. Compare this version. Here the long notes are in the right places. The highest note is on flying. The unimportant words are short notes and not on strong beats. This matches the way the words would be spoken much better. This is called prosody, and it's an important first step in setting text to music. But there's more to be considered. The voice is an instrument, and like any instrument, it has characteristics that must be respected. The first point is the singer's range. For example, if our second example above were sung a fifth lower, it would be in the very bottom of the soprano's range. That would make the sound darker and would not project as well as it does in the middle range. If we put the melody a fifth higher, it would still be in the normal soprano range, but the sound would be much brighter. How would that fit the intended mood? Unlike instruments, singers' ranges aren't standard. The ranges given in counterpoint and harmony books are safe choral ranges, but vocal soloists can vary quite a lot. There are many kinds of soprano, some quite a lot higher than the others. There are heroic tenors and lyric tenors. The sound and range are not the same. If you're writing for solo voices, you need to know the kind of singer you're aiming at, as well as any specific individual characteristics. Another important point, not all vowels project equally well. especially in extreme ranges. For example, try singing a high note loudly while pronouncing ooh. Now sing the same thing while singing ah. Since the former is sung with the mouth almost closed, and the latter with the mouth wide open, the latter will project much better. The composer has to think carefully about where to put important notes in the phrase, given the respective sound of different syllables. The next item in the checklist for music with text is the form. Obviously, in an opera, the music will follow the story. But even in a song, the poem's form will determine the music structure. In particular, these are the things to look for. 1. Punctuation. The composer needs to make the degree of musical punctuation, in the harmony, the rhythm, and so on, correspond to the poem. The end of a stanza will need stronger punctuation than the end of a phrase. The end of the poem needs the strongest punctuation of all. Second, climax and intensity. Normally a poem has some kind of high point where one line or stanza brings it all together. The same thing should happen in the music. Contrast and intensity in the poem need to be reflected in the music. A listener who's following the text should not feel that something important is ignored, or that a less significant phrase in the text gets emphasized too much. Finally, in any vocal music that's accompanied by instruments, it's important to pay attention to balance between the voice and the accompaniment. Particularly with orchestra, it's very easy to overwhelm the voice, especially if there's no microphone. The composer needs to know the principles of balance in relation to voices. I'll be doing an orchestration video about this soon. Also, the accompaniment can play an enormous role in setting the mood and underlying the structure of the music if it's well planned.